The theme or a sentence that's kind of guiding me for this talk or inspiring me is a quote from Matan Buber, who was a great Hasidic and Jewish thinker and philosopher, Hasidic. And he once said, all living is meeting. All living is meeting. And for me, that's one of the sentences that I feel so applies to being an MBSR teacher. How we meet our students and others in this practice of mindfulness. I did a little exercise with you before where we were all standing and kind of flying like birds. And at some point I asked you to sink your weight to the ground and to feel the connection to the ground. And that was inspired by a story I once heard many, many years ago when I was a young Tai Chi student. And it was about the founder of the Yang style, Yang Cheng Fu. And he was a very great fighter, as well as being someone who reputedly was extremely soft, although he was quite a big man and had a lot of power, they say, physical power. And one day a bird landed on his hand. This is a legend, probably. One day a bird landed on his hand, and the bird tried to take off, and it couldn't take off. And the legend goes that he was so soft that the bird couldn't find any ground under its feet, because a bird, and anything that flies actually in that way, first has to sink and feel and then jump and fly. It's very similar to when we want to jump, right? We actually first go down a little bit and then we jump up. Whatever law of aerodynamics that is, I don't know. But I found the idea that the bird couldn't come in contact with something solid so that it could then fly. And for me, that's a kind of meeting. The bird and the energy of the ground, solidness, meet, and then transform into something very light and fly. What is sometimes an aspect that comes up in teaching is that we and our students don't often meet. And I'd like to look at some of the ways, some of the things that get in between, that make it difficult to meet. And as the talk unfolds, it will become, I hope, a bit clearer what I mean by meeting. And at the same time, I want each of you to find your own resonance in what I'm saying. I really feel, as particularly in this group of teachers, that I'm simply sharing with you my experience and my perspective and what I've learned and what I've digested over the years. It doesn't mean it's the truth, and it doesn't mean, if there is such a thing, and it doesn't mean it's the right way or the only way. So I'd like for you really to really invite you to take what's useful for you and let it stimulate you, and also to find your own meanings in what I'm saying. Whatever helps you. That's what's important, and me too. So, what I've experienced as something that really gets in the way are expectations. And I say that because in many of the teachers, all the teachers that graduate from our Institute's program have to write a final paper. I know some of you do as well. And in that final paper, we asked them a number of questions. And one of them is about what did you learn about yourself as you trained as an MBSR teacher? And what were some difficulties for you? And in almost every paper, the theme of meeting what students feel is the pressure to meet the expectations of the students who come to class. Expectations around getting better, feeling less stressed, getting rid of their pain if they have chronic pain, becoming more happy. In other words, that teachers often feel a sense that students are expecting to get something really concrete out of the course and that it's going to be successful and everything's going to be hunky-dory when the course is over. On top of which, they'll be extremely stress resilient and they'll never suffer again. Now, they don't necessarily say that, but that's often what we feel. And sometimes they do. And as teachers, even when we recognize that these are expectations, even when we recognize that they cannot be satisfied in the way that people hope they will be, nevertheless, we often feel the pressure to somehow answer or help or support or help someone to achieve it. So, in fact, we get drawn in. We get sucked in to the expectation cycle before we see really sometimes what's going on. That's often what happens for young teachers who've not been teaching for so long. It's not a mistake. It's very natural. I don't know any teacher who hasn't gone through that. I know in my early years of teaching, it was very much a question for me and theme. Teachers with more experience have their own way, I've observed, of dealing with it. And that is, they become professional. Yeah? That they come, and one of that is about establishing professional distance, so to speak. Another is saying it's their responsibility, not mine. Which is true, to a certain extent. But there's still a relationship between us. And also, how can I as a teacher support someone to begin to understand that it's their work, but not by hitting them over the head in retaliation or reaction or defense, but coming at a deeper kind of way that allows the student to slowly process that. And then in the end say, yeah, it's something I have to do. But with the support of the training that we're guiding them in. Whatever way you look at it, the expectation becomes something that creates a distance. And that often teachers feel a sense of separation, that the student or the situation becomes a subject or a problem, and that they're outside of it, and they've got to either solve it or distance themselves from it. So how can we create a meeting how can there be a meeting around this theme of expectations? I wanted to tell you a story from the Buddhist tradition. Some of you may know it. of an example of skillful teaching around this theme. And it's for some people, it's a very, very powerful story. I just offer it as a invitation. It concerns a woman named Kisa Gotami, who lived at the time of the Buddha. And she was a young woman who had married early and had a child. And her child dies, and she's completely distraught. And she has carrying her child in her arms, her dead child, and she's running everywhere begging for help in any way. And someone tells her to go, that there's a great healer and teacher in the area, and she should go to see him, and that's Shakyamuni Buddha. So she runs up to him with the child in her arm and begs him to restore the child to life. She believes he's a great magician and he can bring the child back to life. So she has an extremely strong wish, desire, and also it is an expectation that he will be able to heal her child. And he welcomes her very kindly and compassionately. And then he says, yes, I will help you, but I need you to do something first. Please bring me a mustard seed from the home where no one has died. So Kisa Gotami is very excited, and she runs away and runs to all the houses in the village, and one after another she knocks on the door and asks, please give me a mustard seed if no one has died here. And in every house she receives the same answer. I'm sorry, we can't help you. We've lost someone. And she does this for a very long time, until at one point she realizes she is not going to find anyone to help her, to give her a mustard seed. And she returns to Shakyamuni Buddha and she bows and she says, please help me bury my child. In her case, she goes on to join the Buddhist order, but it can also be simply that she goes back to her life and begins again to live her life as she lived it. So for me, this story is a very, very rich story. But for me, in this case that we're talking about today, it's about how a teacher can meet an extremely strong and powerful and understandable expectation with compassion and at the same time very deep teaching. And how in his guidance of her, in this case, he's able to guide her to receive her own insight about life and death, to receive a very deep understanding about the nature of life, that it is impermanent, and that all that we love will die, and there will be also birth and death and a cycle of life, which includes great joy and includes great suffering. Now, it is true that there are situations where this may be too strong a teaching, and that maybe someone is not ready to work with something and needs a different kind of support. But as Adel said yesterday, and I also want to second that, he said, I believe, and I may be misquoting him, but that one of the things he learned in psychiatry was about underestimating the capacity of his patients. And I can only say that as a teacher, that one of the things I've learned over the years is that the more I am caught up in my own fear of satisfying the expectations of students or other situations, the more I get caught in underestimating them and backing off and meeting one another in the truths, some truths about life and about the situations that we meet. That's why I feel that the practice of mindfulness and what we learn as we deeply practice is so important in helping us, supporting us as teachers. Because the more we can be intimate with our own discomfort and our own sense of perfectionism and our own wish to do the best we can and give great talks and be perfect and be able to be a master of leading inquiry, the more we come in contact with it, the more it loses its charge to control us and to overpower us and catch us. At the same time, the expectation that we talked about this morning in my group, the expectation that we will one day as teachers never be unsure, never quote unquote make a mistake, never do something unskillful, is also an expectation which is a highway to burnout. Because it's also impossible. Unless we are so in a form of denial or blocking off, and okay, we can maintain it for a while. So we're not only being met with the expectations, the pressure that we feel from students to satisfy their expectations, but we're carrying the same expectation within ourselves. In the story of Kisukotami, the teacher in this case helps her to meet the situation as it is and to come to her own insight. The other thing I want to again emphasize is that as teachers, we then create a subject-object situation where we're on one side and the students are on the other side. And we are not meeting in the ground of our common humanity, but in a different kind of situation. And I wanted to read you something from Christina Feldman, who comments about this story of Kisukotami. I'll read it slowly. She says, each of us holds within us a personal story and a universal story. Our personal story, born of all that we have experienced and felt in this life, is unique to us. Our families, our joys and sorrows, our values, hopes, and disappointments. The countless events of our lives have shaped who we are and how we see in ways that are unique to each of us. But when we understand that our personal story holds within it the universal story of all human beings, then we have the radical possibility of dissolving the boundaries of I and you, the us and them. As MBSR teachers, I think we know the power of sharing and people listening to each other in class, and how hearing the stories of someone else can often be very supportive for someone to realize, I'm not alone. This is not just about me, someone else is experiencing that. And it helps to create a certain spaciousness. It doesn't mean one denies one's own difficulty, but the sense of not being completely alone can be very helpful and can show a door, as it were, to moving beyond, it's just about me. It's the same for us as many of us as teachers. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I just say a lot of teachers have shared this, and I've heard them speak about this. I know it's true for myself that when someone comes with a very strong expectation about something that I'm teaching, I feel less so, but still under pressure. And what comes up is often, and other teachers tell me, well, how can I use my skills of teaching and all the things that to get them to just see this? To get them to see this. And if they just will get it, then everything will be fine. And I'll no longer feel the pressure. What has helped me is to connect to the fear, or to the sorrow, or to the pain, or to whatever someone is experiencing, to connect to that by connecting it to it in myself. This may be a banal or a very commonplace example, but it has meant so much to me. In September, I had a toothache like I have never in my life had. I never had such terrible pain in all my years that I can remember. And I was not in this country, and I couldn't go to my dentist right away. Eventually, I was able to go to a dentist, and I struggled for about 4 days with the pain. And I fought, I struggled, I pulled out every meditation technique I could. I started taking all sorts of massive doses. First, I started very small, which is the tiny little aspirin. And by the end of the days, I was on 800 milligrams every 2 hours of ibuprofen. It was unbearable. And the moment the pain went a little bit away because of the massive dose of ibuprofen, I thought, oh, okay, I can deal with this, I can deal with this. And, every quarter hour as the pain got more, I became desperate because and I could deal with it sometimes better, sometimes worse. But I said to my husband, Norbert, for the first time, I truly, truly understand experience of my body, what it is to have that kind of pain. I knew it intellectually, and I'd worked with students who had that kind of pain. So that was a very dramatic way to connect to that pain. And there's all sorts of other, pain, emotional pain that people are experiencing, that if we get into fix-it mode, rather than allow ourselves first to connect to the fear or pain or whatever it is, then we will be separating. We will be creating distance. But to be able to connect to that in ourselves in a way that will not drown us or bring us down, but allow us to still be able to respond, means we have to, in our practice, allow ourselves to go into that. That's why our practice is so supportive. Because we can be present we can be in the presence of suffering, deep suffering, acknowledge it as an aspect of life, honor the individual suffering of the person, and guide them and support them to then be present with it in their own terms, in their own way. I think where another aspect where this sense of separation or insecurity for teachers comes up is in practicing inquiry. I've heard a lot of teachers, MBSR teachers, say that inquiry was the most difficult and is the most difficult of teaching aspect of teaching MBSR for them. And they say because it asks them to be with people in a way that they're not used to. Intimate, not in charge, not didactically telling people what to do, not giving a diagnosis and categorizing people. That's what a lot of doctors have told me. That's difficult for them. They feel that the tools that they have of anamnesia and all the kinds of categories and their manuals and things, it's difficult for them because they feel they're being asked to be with someone in a very, very different way, not to have the separation between them of all the things that they have. What is it about inquiry that feels so shaky? I think for me, it was about not having any kind of, set answers, that whatever would emerge out of the meeting in that situation. That I couldn't pull things, out of the hat and apply them. But that it was a dance, and it was a meeting, and it was an interaction. And is a dance and a meeting and an interaction between me and someone else. And that what can help me is to be aware of that and to be aware of when I might want to give an answer that will, rather than open up the discussion, just cap it and close it down. Someone will go, yes, yes, but inside it's, no. There's not really something coming up. Again, if we can meet ourselves in our own inquiry, in our practice, in our lives, and inquire within ourselves, staying open, keeping the space flexible, flowing with what's coming up, that can support us to trust and guide or be with someone else. I wanted to talk also a little bit about how the practice of self-compassion can help, can support us in meeting and being with expectations. Something happened the other day which for me was such a beautiful example of how to steer a course, as it were, or how to teach through love rather than correction. I was in a ice cafe, and there was a little girl, maybe 2 years old, and because I'm often sitting with books and computers, children love to come over and figure out what I'm doing. So the child came over and started, talking with me and this and that, and trying to touch my computer and stuff. And usually what happens is the mother or father or who's ever taking care of the kid will come over and say, no, don't do that. Leave the nice lady alone. And pull the kid away and put them on the chair. And this mother came over, picked up her child, started covering her with kisses, and really holding her and embracing her, and brought her back to her seat, and they sat down and continued eating ice cream. The mother kind of smiled at me. And the little girl looked at me, and then she went back to her ice cream and was very happy. I broke out in tears. I literally broke out in tears. I was so touched by how the mother worked with her child. Rather than correcting her or saying something, she maybe identified the child wanted some contact at that moment, wanted some nurturing or care. And at the same time, it had the result of, leaving the nice lady alone. And I wondered a lot about that. I wondered a lot about what that was bringing up. And I think that in teaching, that's also an aspect. It's very easy to correct and to say, no, not this way, that way. And to come from above. So what can support that I meet and support a student in a way that doesn't feel like I'm correcting them, but supporting them to find their own wisdom and to find their own way. It's always my problem when I have too many notes. So I'd like to invite you for a moment to just sit for a moment in a way where you can be in contact with yourself. And just notice what's there for you around this theme of expectations, about meeting. Just noticing if there are thoughts coming up, or feelings, emotions. Maybe coming up strongly is still the question, it's all very good, but how? And just being with that how, or that question. Is there something for you that has the depth and sense of closure that Kizukutami had around the theme of expectation? Your own wisdom emerging. And I'll just end by saying that when we get caught up in how questions, we're separating away from an understanding or something that can truly help us to stay with that question as an open question, as a living question, rather than one that we immediately have to answer and put a cap on. And that each time it will be a new meeting. Thank you.